Arbitrary rules in leadership. Of course, you now may think, oh, I think I had a boss in the recent past or maybe in the distant past where, let's say, the decisions were a bit patriarchic or matriarchal when it's a female leader, and they didn't really give reason for that, but it's just how they were. And of course, today even people will say some leaders are just different than others, and that means some people give you a bit of reasoning, and some people's personality simply tells you, just do what I tell you and you just follow them. That's just how they are. The statement "that's just how they are" already says that we are in the area of arbitrary rules. And of course, as always, we want to give you proper examples of how arbitrary rules happen right now at the moment. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. Jared Kushner, who is a senior White House advisor for I'm still looking for the reason. Basically, due to his ties to the Trump family, Jared Kushner hired a college roommate to create his national coronavirus testing plan. I mean, that is one option how you can do it. You could, of course, have used internationally experienced scientists or people who did that before, but hey, why not ask your college roommate? And of course, this whole testing plan went out of the window when it was questioned by a couple of experts, so it all disappeared in thin air within just a couple of days after. If you want to have some more arbitrary rules, Donald Trump just abolished the AFFH rule. That's the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing rule. And the AFFH rule simply is there to make sure that, for example, suburbs are not just populated with one certain group. So not only by rich white people, for example, they are there for diversity. When you say what is the equivalent of abolishing AFFH, it would be compared to look at your city and they say, oh, in our suburbs, we just abolished social housing. Some, of course, will say, oh, that's nice, it raises the value of my house. Yeah, and that's exactly the arbitrary situation he's in. He tries to save a couple of votes with the upcoming elections in November. But what really happens is that there will be even more segregation than there was before. And as there's no reasoning for this, there's no reason to abolish this rule. It is simply appeasement towards a certain voters group. And it means that segregation becomes stronger, a massive disadvantage for many people. And then, of course, when you go to the arbitrary rules, the FIFA, and of course you will not say, oh, please, no, it's not about football, is it? No, we're not talking about football. But the FIFA gave away coronavirus help. And now you might think, wow, that's great. Wait for it. I mean, many will have thought, as soon as he mentions FIFA, there will be a downturn somewhere. And of course there is. The FIFA gives away $1 million to every association. Every football association gets $1 million. And of course, you now could question, why do they all get $1 million? Isn't that a bit arbitrary that the smallest association gets the same as the biggest association? And I mean, I come from Germany. Of course, I don't live in Germany anymore. But, well, as we all know, the German Football Association and the English one and the French and the Italian and the Spanish one, they are not really struggling. It's not that they run short of money. They have billions and billions of savings on their accounts. And if you think that this rule is bad and really arbitrary, wait for the final point. And when some people think, oh, what's coming now? Yeah, there's a bonus, because there is a bonus for women's football. And now you think, oh, please don't tell me it's way less than $1 million. Yeah, it's slightly less than $1 million. I mean, you could have said they get $1 million for men's football, $1 million for women's football. No, FIFA thought we give $1 million for football in general. And then there's a bonus for women's football, which is, drum roll, $50,000. Yeah. And there we are, a group of non-diverse people deciding about a minority in this sport and saying, hey, here's 50,000 for you, be thankful for that. And now we see how these arbitrary rules happen, because now we come to the moment where we say, how does it work and how do we do better leadership? Because arbitrary rules are a major problem in every organization, no matter of what size of organization we're talking about, no matter if it's large corporate or just a very small company, owner-led. So arbitrary rules. Number one is there is no reasoning and there are no facts backing the decision. When we look at the FIFA decision, you could have said you base it on either the size of the association or how well they're doing financially or on the amount of coronavirus outbreaks they had. Different facts could be considered, but they just gave away $1 million per association and say, here we are, that's it. And that is a typical case of an arbitrary decision. And I'm going to give you very specific examples from the real world economy of arbitrary decisions and how they work. So number one, there is no factual basis for the decision. Number two is people try to give you a pseudo reasoning, but they say it's more on the soft factor. Oh, this is based on my experience and I think it's the best for all of us. So they give you a bit of chumbawamba, but they don't really give you any proper reasoning for the decision. That's aspect number two. And aspect number three is arbitrary decisions normally go against a certain minority in the organization. And that does not have to be a racial minority or an ethnic minority. I'll just give you an example. At the moment, many organizations say, oh, we have to cut the budget of CSR, corporate social responsibility. And of course, you can say there's COVID-19 around, so we have a financial problem, which is fair because many organizations have at the moment in these very insecure and unsecure times, then they say, well, we need to cut budgets. Okay, when you cut budgets there, aren't there other areas where you could cut? Maybe corporate expenses, maybe corporate costs, maybe board level income and bonuses, and no one talks about that. So when you just cut it from a certain very vulnerable point, that is always a very clear sign that we have another arbitrary decision. So what comes on top of that? Normally when there are bad consequences, for example, a PR disaster happens, it's always blamed on external factors or something which was unexpected, which no one could know. When it comes to the accountability, they say either no one is accountable because it wasn't properly documented and we have no idea how this could happen, or they say, oh, the whole organization off, so suddenly we are all accountable, just to be sure that no one properly has to face consequences, which is of course not correct. And then of course, one phrase is where they say, oh, we're going to have an in-depth examination of the case and we get back to you as soon as that finishes. Some of them really properly do that, but many organizations simply try to wait months or even years until the next scandal pops up in press, stays there for months, and then they just publish this report where no one's listening at that moment. And then you just say, okay, that was it. We promised, we delivered, ticked the box off our list. I just give you now a couple of examples how arbitrary rules also work in the real environment out there. So aspect number one, when you have very high class lawyers of the really prestigious law firms, you don't have to like them. I know that some people will now write me emails and say, don't give me an example of them. They are bad people. So first, you can't generalize. When you say you don't have a high respect for them, that's okay. You have the right to your opinion. But when you have that legal qualification, which means you have an excellent exam, you must be very sharp in thinking and writing, which is a skill not many people have. So now we have people who get into these law firms in a different way. They do a bit of additional work. Normally they're called either contract lawyers or assistant lawyers. They don't have the prestigious degrees from Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, with Sirius Law School or wherever it is. They just came in there because someone knew someone who knew someone, or they applied for a minor position and suddenly it turns out they are excellent. And then someone offers them a career, and the first ones saying no to this career are the ones with the prestigious degrees. And that is nothing else than academic arrogance. The same people who say, oh, it's only about results, it's only about winning for the client, it's only about winning these cases. As soon as someone turns up who is outside your alumni club, you say, we're not going to accept that person. Not only is that bad leadership, not only does it harm your own organization, it also is completely arbitrary. When someone is able to do the job and is legally allowed to do the job, as soon as they step into your footsteps, you might say no because you fear they could overtake you. That's a typical case of an arbitrary decision. Another example is when people get promoted, and I quote, because they are here for a while, or another example, they are around for a long while. These are all quotations from the reasoning why people were promoted. Just because you show up on time for a very long time doesn't mean that you do your job well. Being promoted for just showing up for years is arbitrary on a level that it really frustrates people who walk the so-called and often wanted extra mile. So when you just tell people, oh, you have to hang around here and then you get it at the end, that of course frustrates people who really and properly excel in their jobs. Just a third example is when someone is just born in the same family and then takes over the company. And of course, now some people will say, well, isn't it normal that family businesses pass on the business to the next generation? Yes, it is. It is a special case, but we have cases of large-sized family businesses where they said, we try to put our sons, our daughters, or whatever gender identity you have, we try to put them in charge. We saw it did not work, so we hired external people to run the business. That does not mean that the shares of the business leave the family, but they put different people in place because they saw it is for the best of the organization. And that is excellent leadership. Taking people from outside the family because you see you can't do it by yourself. But when you say we take that person because they're born with the same family name, that is as arbitrary as it can be. So how can you do it better? 3 steps to deliver better leadership. Step number 1, always give a fact-based reason why you make that decision. I now know that sometimes people say, oh, but what happens if they can't be given any kind of factual reason? I'll just give you an example. When blockchain happened and Bitcoin came to the market, how do you want to give factual reasoning to invest in Bitcoin? We didn't have any kind of business cases, nothing. It was just completely new. You couldn't know if it works or not. But then, of course, and that is step number 2, when you can't give hard facts, try to make a socially acceptable and for people understandable declaration why you go down that road. So for example, you can say we have different people who did prognosis and expertise, and that's why we invest in that. These people have decades of experience. By the way, when it goes wrong, these people with all their experience have to take the blame and have to face that the accountability is with them, not with everyone or no one or the organization. It is with them. That is the risk. That's why it's called leadership, because you get the fame when it works well and you get the blame when it doesn't. If you don't like that system, don't become a leader and don't pretend you are one, because you're obviously not. So step number 1, give a fact-based reason. Step number 2, if you can't give a fact-based reason, give a socially acceptable and for people understandable reasoning based, for example, on experiences or different reports you read, but give them a reason they can understand. And step number 3 is always take care that justice is in place. And justice only is in place when any kind of disadvantage is shared amongst a reasonable group of people. I just give you an example. When you now say, okay, we have to cut the budget of the corporate social responsibility department. And then, of course, some people might claim, why don't we cut costs at the sales department? Well, the reason for that is we have a crisis. We have to sell our product even better. Cutting costs in the sales department doesn't make much sense, because then our sales will go down even further. So we don't cut there. But when people say, for example, do we still need the highest class of corporate cars when we rent them? Do we still need business class travel? Do we still need these kind of bonuses, which are 500 times the average employee salary per year? And these are reasonable questions. So when you cut somewhere, always be sure justice is only given when it's shared. A cut that goes to a certain department can hardly ever be justified that you only do it in one position of the organization. The only case where this can happen is when you say the approach we have there is dead. So for example, in former times, in certain industries, there were, let's say, events where people were influenced to make certain decisions, and then compliance happened, and they said you can't go to these invited events because these are only to make you buy with a certain supplier. And of course, when you have an events department running only these events become illegal or unacceptable for compliance departments of your customers. Gone. That's the only moment where you can say you cut at just one point. Justice is only given when a cut is shared amongst a reasonable amount of people. I now wish you a very good start to this new and hopefully for you well-going week. Let me know if I can be of any kind of help. Just drop me an email. You have my email address in the show notes of this podcast. Be sure that you check your own leadership with the factors I gave you. Of course, I'm happy to discuss with you. Just add me on social media and or just drop me an email and we just take it from there. And of course, now I wish you a great start to this new week. And for today, thank you very much for your time.